Dead by Daylight is a game filled with many licensed characters, all taken from their own universe by the Entity, DBD's spidery overlord. But what happens to these licensed universes and their timelines when these key characters are taken from them? What changes and what is their fate? Let's explore this today, discussing all the licensed universes available and placing them into one of our tiers, from completely doomed to actually better off after the Entity's interference. After all, the removal of some characters in certain universes is actually a good thing for that universe. It's not all bad. Let's go chronologically, and so starting off with Halloween. Halloween has two of its key players removed, Laurie Strode and Michael Myers. They're both quite important, with Myers being the main drive of the story, and the killer who causes the legend of the Boogeyman and the deaths of several teenagers on Halloween night, 1978. Laurie is the only survivor. There's no specified moment for when they're both taken in DBD's lore, with the lore being quite vague surrounding these details. I think the likelihood is that Myers disappears after being shot by Loomis and falling from the window. Laurie is taken shortly after. Then what happens after this is quite dependent on which sequel you choose to follow. If we go with the most recent 2018 reboot and its sequels, then whilst the world is affected, it's not too different. With the disappearance of Myers and Laurie. Myers likely becomes an urban legend, with him never being found. Laurie simply would be presumed a victim of Myers, never starting a family either, with her gone. The universe suffers small and simple changes, with the events of the future films simply not happening, because the two main characters just aren't there. Overall though, it's a net positive because Myers is no longer killing people, so this universe is actually benefited from the Entity intervening. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is rather unaffected, I'd say, as well, and mainly because Bubba simply isn't that important in the grand scheme of things. Bubba gets taken by the Entity at the very end of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Sally has just escaped his grasp, and he spins with confusion and anger, awaiting law enforcement to come for him and his family. With him now gone, the main difference is just how subsequent events play out in Texas Chainsaw 2, with many simply not happening. At least not in the same way, with the film beginning with Sally's uncle investigating a string of chainsaw killings. These would never happen with Bubba gone, and so it's possible the Sawyer family either is stopped, or they simply never get investigated. So whilst Bubba is gone, this could actually be a net negative for the world, with the Sawyer families sort of getting away with what they did, and possibly killing more covertly in the future. A Nightmare on Elm Street has a much better timeline after the removal of the universe's main antagonist, Freddy Krueger. Freddy is taken from his universe just after the events of the 2010 film, where he returns to get Quentin and Nancy. The lore possibly hints toward Nancy already being dead at Freddy's hands, with Freddy's second target being Quentin, who he chases into the Baden boiler room. As he chases him though, they are both taken. This is a simple net positive for the world though. Up to this point, Freddy was seemingly an unkillable dream demon that was causing deaths throughout Springwood. Whilst he may have initially just targeted his old victims, he is shown to still attack others too. He likely would have continued on and on, tormenting humanity for years to come. As long as there's fear for him, he'd be there. Whilst the disappearance of Quentin is sad, Springwood and the world returns to normality and safety with Freddy gone, so it's largely a positive change, and an end to a threat that could have persisted for a very long time. Left 4 Dead has the sole character of Bill. Bill is taken during his final moments when he splits off from his group to turn on a generator, saving them, but dying to multiple tanks. However, the Left 4 Dead universe is already deep into an apocalypse due to the green flu outbreak, and so there's little consequence to Bill's disappearance. He does save his buddies, but the world is still very much apocalyptic. Zoe, Lewis, and Francis will all live though, which is good. Bill's body will disappear, and that's about the only change. This universe is quite literally unchanged by Bill's disappearance. In fact, the only minor change I think is that his body's not found by the Left 4 Dead 2 crew later on, but that doesn't make too much difference really. Saw's timeline is a rare case of basically not changing at all. Both Amanda, the pig, and David Tapp are taken at their respective points of death. Tapp is taken after being shot by Zepp, and Amanda after being shot by Jeff. The only change to the timeline is the disappearance of their bodies as the Entity takes them. In Amanda's case, there would have been witnesses to her death, but all those witnesses die shortly after her, leaving little consequence. There is likely still evidence of them dying there though, with blood being present on the ground. Saw would be basically the same, aside these strange disappearances. The acts of Kramer and Amanda don't really affect the wider world more substantially, and so yeah, not much changes really. It's a weird one, but the entity does some really clean takes here and there. Ash vs Evil Dead's timeline is hard to discern as Ash is taken moments before the end of the show's season 4 finale. We don't actually know what happens after this point really. The world has just fallen to a demon apocalypse when Ash awakens to a secret compound where he's been kept, safe, ready to fulfill his role as the prophesized savior of humanity. This is something he likely would have fulfilled too, and so this world is completely doomed without him. It's already in a pretty rough state, but without Ash, it's certainly gone entirely. The world is completely doomed without him. The entity has truly doomed this world to be overrun by demons and completely destroyed. Stranger Things has 3 of its protagonists taken, and a single antagonist, Steve, Nancy, Jonathan, and a Demogorgon. I say a Demogorgon as we don't know which Demogorgon it is. Steve and Nancy are both taken in an unspecified point between seasons 2 and 3 of the show, whilst investigating the Hawkins lab. Jonathan doesn't have distinct lore, but it appears he tracks them after their disappearance to their last known location at the lab, and is subsequently taken too. For the Demogorgon, we have no earthly clue when or where it was taken. The lore just explains what a Demogorgon is. My best guess though is that it's the season 1 Demogorgon that 11 connected with, as it has the add-ons 11 Soda, Barb's Glasses, and Deer Lung, all key season 1 moments. It does have season 3 references too though, so I think it's probably just meant to be a generic Demogorgon. This means that removing this Demogorgon from the Stranger Things universe probably does very little to the timeline, if it's just another foot soldier type of deal. The removal of Nancy, Steve, and Jonathan though is a different matter. They all played a key part in season 3 to taking down the Mind Flayer, and then also in season 4 toward taking down Vecna. Stranger Things is all about the team effort, the key part each of the characters play to achieve a successful outcome. 2 huge season 3 storylines would essentially not have happened without these characters, namely Nancy and Jonathan's investigation into the strange rats, which eventually leads to the Mind Flayer. Steve would have never worked at Scoops Ahoy, and so that whole Scoop troop is never formed, and the Russian lab beneath the Starcourt Mall is never discovered. It would likely end in the Mind Flayer winning and killing 11 and destroying Hawkins. So yeah, that's pretty doomed too. Going back even further though, season 3 as a whole would be entirely different, likely starting instead with the mysterious disappearance of the 3 teens. Without these 3 protagonists, it's highly likely that the Stranger Things universe has been doomed to being completely destroyed by the invasion of Vecna and the Upside Down. Possibly they find another way, but I think these characters are actually quite integral, and so it wouldn't work out the same, and they would ultimately lose. Silent Hill has the characters of Cheryl, Sybil, Lisa, James, Maria, and Pyramid Head taken. These are all very key characters, but in each case, and based on the lore, the key moments of the games have all already sort of happened. Silent Hill 1 must have resulted in the same outcome, as 2 and 3 follow their canon paths. For 2, it does appear the events of 2 still take place based on the lore, and so James resolves his guilt and subsequently disappears afterwards, which doesn't change much really. For 3, it takes place after Cheryl has already taken down the Order, a cult, and is now working in a center for troubled youths. The lore seems to be pretty clear that despite the entity's intervention, things still moved along, and the timeline as of now is normal. It's actually more progressed, I would say, because we have extra Cheryl story. Even in Pyramid Head's case, he was just about to go to sleep before the entity came to invite him to the realm. Silent Hill, I believe, is unaffected almost entirely. Resident Evil has a high number of characters taken away from its universe, with all of them being key players in how the world ends up. Leon, Jill, Chris, Claire, Ada, Rebecca, Sheva, Carlos, Wesker, and Nemesis, all of these characters being some of the key protagonists and antagonists in Resident Evils 1 to 5. So what happens to their worlds with them gone? For this one, I'll split it up into 2 separate canons due to these characters coming in 2 separate chapters. After all, if the characters from the RE chapter had disappeared in the same universe as Project W, it wouldn't make any sense. So these two are taken from two separate Resident Evil universes, I think. So let's look at the Resident Evil universe first, and how it changes with the disappearances of Jill, Leon, Chris, Claire, and Nemesis. The characters here are largely taken from Resident Evil 2 and 3, which takes place over the span of about a day and during the fall of Raccoon City after it's been overrun by zombies infected with the T-virus. Leon and Claire have an interwoven story where they first go to the RPD and later discover the hidden nest lab beneath the city and the vaccine for the G-virus, a virus that also infects William Birkin. In DBD's lore, Leon is stated to be taken upon his approach to the lab, and we can presume Claire is taken around the same point. Concurrently, Jill is also in Raccoon City and being chased down by the Umbrella-created Nemesis T-Type, who has been programmed to kill all members of STAR's team, a team who recently uncovered Umbrella's twisted experiments in the Arklay Mountains. Jill's story mostly focuses on survival, but eventually leads her down into a nest lab also, where she discovers a T-virus sample, which can be used to make a vaccine. She too, however, is taken before she ever reaches the lab. Nemesis is taken shortly after. This is awful for the universe, as it means no essential samples are recovered, and the progress toward a vaccine for both the T and G virus is set back exponentially to square one. Raccoon City is still likely hit by a nuclear blast, but Umbrella essentially wins this one, likely leading to catastrophic effects and potential world destruction. It's also worth noting in this world, due to the absence of Leon, the President's daughter is kidnapped in RE4 by the Los Illuminados. Their plan was to infect her with the parasite Las Plagas and return her to the President, leading to world domination once more. Without Leon infiltrating the Illuminados, this is another case of the world probably being destroyed by a bioweapon. Just to give a few examples. This universe is truly doomed without these characters. Oh yeah, and Nemesis. Nemesis dies anyway, so it doesn't really matter, I'd say, for him. Hellraiser's timeline is quite drastically altered, but largely into making the universe a lot duller with the absence of Pinhead, the lead Cenobite, along with his co-worker, the Chatterer. The fates of the other two Cenobites, Butterball and the female Cenobite, are unclear, but they may be dead at the entity's hand. The Cenobite's arrival to the realm is another unclear case, with there being no specified moment in the lore. It seems the way the entity got them here is by means of stealing the box. This is interesting, as it likely means there is no box now in the Hellraiser universe, which means no summoning of the Cenobites, which sort of inadvertently means that the universe is a whole lot safer without the Cenobite presence in it, and the temptations of the box. The main change is probably this, along with one of the other two Cenobites we see in the first film taking over as the lead Cenobite. So overall, I would say the universe is greatly improved by the entity's intervention. Sadako Rising focuses largely on the story of Sadako, with the DBD lore occurring years after the events of Ring. Yoichi is a man now, and seemingly a few decades have passed, with Sadako still down the well. This is interesting as it technically extends the timeline in an original manner, which I think is the only case of this, DBD extending a licensed timeline. I guess it kind of does it with Silent Hill, but in this case, it extends it quite extensively beyond, a few decades. And in this timeline, everything is already kind of resolved canonically, and so DBD's extension both briefly makes things worse, but also gives a finality to everything too. With the reappearance of Sadako, with her killing some of Yuichi's students, as he now works as a university lecturer, he seeks to find out what happened to them, as he's still tormented by his past. Sadako does this likely after being saved by the entity from the well, where the two make an agreement. Sadako baits Yuichi in, leading him to a lighthouse where he is taken soon after. The main difference in this universe is just Yoichi's gone, and a few more people die. As a net positive though, I'd say it's better off. Sadako is finally gone, and so the universe is improved greatly. She would have likely been down there pretty much eternally, killing people over the years, so yeah, huge improvement for the world. Resident Evil Project W is a slightly more positive outcome compared to Resident Evil. Project W removes Ada, Rebecca, Chris, Sheva, and Wesker. The key reason why this universe is debatably saved is because of Wesker being gone. The main focus of this chapter is RE5. RE5 revolves around Wesker and his plan for world dominance by releasing his new Ouroboros virus, a virus which if released will wipe out humanity almost entirely. Wesker is taken in his lore moments before his final acts and release of the virus. So whilst both Chris and Sheva are also taken, the world is just wholly better off due to Wesker also being removed finally and completely. Granted, Chris and Sheva would have canonically stopped him either way, but the entity just did the job first and probably saved a lot more suffering too. Going back even further though, with the removal of Ada, who was investigating the aforementioned RE4 Los Illuminados and working for Wesker at the time, she would have never recovered a sample of Las Plagas, meaning the Ouroboros virus may have never been created to begin with in this universe. Wesker would potentially be releasing an inferior version in this universe in fact, a threat that possibly wouldn't have affected the entire world so badly. So overall I would say slightly improved, given the fact that Wesker would have been stopped either way. The removal of Rebecca doesn't change too much, with her uncovering some of Umbrella's wrongdoings as well, similar to Leon and Jill. Umbrella just remain in a stronger position without her. Alien is changed with the removal of the characters of Ellen Ripley and the Xenomorph, both of which are taken at the very end of the first Alien film, after the Xenomorph has just been ejected into space and Ripley has entered cryosleep. This is quite a neat moment to leave off from. Xeno's fate is largely unchanged. The Xeno was ejected into outer space, and so would have died anyway, and coincidentally was actually saved by the entity, as it would have died out there. Ripley on the other hand would have survived and eventually found herself back to safety after 57 years in cryosleep. Once she awakens, she discovers that the exomoon that the Nostromo crew and herself first discovered the Xenomorphs on is now home to a colony, which has recently gone dark. Ripley goes there and essentially saves the day, destroying the Xenomorphs and defeating the Queen, stopping them from getting to Earth. So without Ripley and her warning and actions, Earth is likely consumed by Xenomorphs, I would think at least, and possibly destroyed entirely. Humanity may be close to wiped out due to Ripley's lack of presence and forewarning, so that's pretty bad. That's a pretty bad one actually. Chucky's timeline is considerably better with the disappearance of Chucky, which appears to occur during Child's Play 2's closing chapter within the toy factory. Chucky chases a vision of Andy into the entity's fog, leaving his universe far better off. Chucky's disappearance here means that none of the sequels happen, realistically. The big difference too is that Andy, although traumatized, likely grows up to be a lot more normal, instead of going on to his ultra-prep state in Cult of Chucky. This also means in this universe that Tiffany is never killed, and placed into a doll. They never have their doll child together, and yeah, the world is just better off in general, I'd say. Chucky's reign of terror ends here, which is, again, great and overall positive for the universe, even if it's on a smaller scale in the grand scheme of things. D&D doesn't have a specified timeline for its universe, but we can still infer the consequences of the entity's actions onto it. Astri and Bearmoth's disappearance, the two bards who sought to defeat Vecna alongside an unspecified group, will not have much impact with their disappearance. The big change in this universe is the disappearance of Vecna, likely tentatively presumed dead, potentially at the hands of the two bards. Maybe that's their impact. The bards become famed for finally defeating Vecna. Overall, this is a net positive for this universe. With Vecna gone, there will be a subsequent struggle for power more than likely, but with a power as strong as Vecna's gone, it'll still be a huge net positive for the world, saving likely billions in the futures to come. Alan Wake is likely changed quite substantially when its titular character, Alan, is removed from the world, is how it may initially appear. Alan's universe is a bit different though, with him being inside the Dark Place, a dimension where Alan's stories as a writer have come to life, and a place he's been trapped in for 13 years, with DBD's lore taking place between Alan Wake 1 and 2. Here he remembers a script he wrote a long time ago named Dead of Night, with the premise being very similar to that of DBD's own lore. He attempts to recall it, rewriting it, seemingly with the entity's partial help, with its whispers in his head. He eventually summons a wall of fog, which his characters walk through and he follows, hoping it will lead to his escape. This means that this is the I think only universe that is both canon to DBD, but also DBD is canon to it, due to Alan writing himself in. It's plausible he eventually writes himself out too, I suppose. I think therefore there's little change to his story, with the alternate being that he never escapes, but I think that's the less likely of the two. I think the story probably goes that Alan writes himself in, writes himself out eventually, and then the events of Alan Wake 2 occur, which is pretty cool. So yeah, DBD is just like fully canon here. That's kind of amazing, right? Castlevania removed the characters of Dracula and Trevor Belmont. At the point Dracula's taken, he's actually dying or in the process of it during the Battle of 1999. Dracula is killed by Julius Belmont with an enchanted whip. This is largely just a positive, I'd say, for the wider world. He would have inevitably returned after his supposed death, and so his removal by the entity is simply a positive. The threat of Dracula is gone. On the other hand, we have Trevor Belmont's disappearance, with him disappearing far earlier in 1476, after also defeating Dracula with the same whip his ancestors later used too. After this, Trevor simply returns to a simple life, living in a secluded home in the hills. His eventual disappearance eventually creates a legend around him. That's about it. I think the universe as a whole and the timeline is saved essentially with the final disappearance of Dracula, although his disappearance would likely be quite tentatively believed, a bit like Vecna's would. Tomb Raider and the removal of Lara Croft initially appears sort of trivial, maybe? On an intimate level, the main difference in Lara's story after all would simply be that she never rescues her friend, Sam, from the strange island of Yamatai that she went to investigate. However, on Yamatai, Lara uncovers something much larger with her discovery of the Solari, a cult attempting to free the Sun Queen, which Lara ultimately stops. This would not have happened without her there, nor would the two sequels to this game, Rise of the Tomb Raider and Shadow of the Tomb Raider. This would mean the organization Trinity, who are also pretty culty, lots of cults out here, would likely achieve their goal to destroy a large portion of the world, believing it is their duty, and doing so with ancient relics. Basically, the world is probably pretty screwed without Lara stepping in here, and again, on a smaller scale, people like Sam would have died. So actually, Lara has quite a substantial effect on her own world. Tokyo Ghoul is kind of a tough one, and quite complex I think. Kaneki is taken by the entity just after he devours Jason, at a peak moment of torment. This means Kaneki never really gets to process this and does not get to play a part in any future events within the Tokyo Ghoul universe. I think the main takeaway for this universe would be that Kaneki and his role in accepting himself and bridging the gap between humans and ghouls would never really happen, and the two would remain divided. I think that's probably the main difference, therefore the world would certainly be worse off without Kaneki. Five Nights at Freddy's contains only the antagonist of the series, William Afton, or Springtrap. Afton is taken 30 years after his spring locking, but before he's able to begin terrorizing again in Five Nights at Freddy's 3 at the Fazbear's Fright attraction. During the lore and from Afton's perspective, he seems quite confused as to what is going on, as whilst 30 years pass, he doesn't experience it this way, with it instead feeling like just a few seconds. This means that the events of FNAF 3 simply don't take place in the same way. Afton doesn't reawaken at Fazbear's Fright, and his son Michael never encounters his father. This could also possibly mean the attraction is never burned too. Afton has already done most of the damage he would do prior to FNAF 3, and so I think whilst obviously better off this universe is, with him eliminated from his appearance in any of the future sequels. It's not quite world differing, but obviously it is for the FNAF story. Overall, a net positive. Thankfully for the Walking Dead universe, both Rick and Michonne Grimes as well as Daryl are taken at a point where their roles in the story of our main cast of characters is not as consequential. As Rick is taken during Season 9 and Michonne from 10, the core Alexandria group is safe for the most part. Things are stable, and this is represented with a large time jump in this section of the show. As for the wider universe, it's still very much in the midst of an apocalypse, and the existence of Rick and Michonne, whilst providing some with hope, makes very little difference to the wider state of the world. or the outcome of many characters. Things do still change, of course. The core intimate one would probably be that Judith and Rick Jr. grew up beyond this point without their parents, and likely in the care of another Alexandria resident. The subsequent sequel shows The Ones Who Live and Daryl Dixon also simply wouldn't happen. The main difference may be in-universe that the CRM are simply stronger as well, having never encountered Rick and Michonne, who put a sizable dent in their army. The Walking Dead universe is still very much in the midst of an apocalypse though. Regardless of what happens, there's not too much of an effect on the story. I'd say overall though, it's slightly worse off without these characters. Alright, well, that's gonna do it. I do hope you enjoyed. Let me know any of your thoughts down below. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.